And I've invited Sumedha today to share the way how she's teaching these days, because we're coming from the same root and we have, been going different paths, but in a way our teaching is evolving along quite similar ways, and that's very heartening for me. So last time, I said when we are at the end of our control, that's when the mystery can come in to meet us at the edge of emergence. And for that we need a willingness to hold steady in the midst of the unraveling of our ecocultural paradigm, which is like, in a nutshell, it's all about human supremacy, that this is all here for us and we have dominion over it, and we try to develop systems of control. And we have gotten to the end of that path because it's just simply not working anymore. It never has really worked, but we weren't aware of it because we hadn't yet crossed boundaries. But now we have crossed several of the planetary boundaries, and there's an urgent need for us to make ourselves available to be informed by the repercussions of that. And in that way, reframing our practice, the Buddhist practice we have received, from Iron Age India, which is a very powerful practice. And now we need to reframe it in order to bring out more of its timeless power for transformation and liberation. And now I hand over to Sumedha to talk to us about the necessity of being with not knowing in order for growth and maturation to happen. And expanding and shifting perception intentionally so we can open up new ways of seeing and being and doing, which comes from the being, not the other way around. So it's not a shift which can be led by the intellect, but it's coming from the ground up, through the body. And handing over to you, Sumedha. Thank you so much.
Sure. So I'm really glad to be here. It's lovely to be at the Earth Room, which is such a amazing, deep and beautiful, really beautiful space, and to be with Ayas and Chita. Yeah, so I really love the old teachings, and I feel like they have a lot of relevance for our situation today. So I'm sure many of you know Bhikkhu Bodhi has spoken of the kind of culture that we live in now as like a culture of death, where it's like objectification, and then we use and we consume and we abuse, actually. And all of that is also related to a very profound disconnection for me within our own being, with this larger sacred life that we're part of. And myself, I really feel that the Buddha was asking us to look at this predicament already, like how we tend to separate and objectify and then grasp. So grasping, of course, was or clinging was a core part of his teaching. And I also think he was very skillful in how he suggested we could use our attention. So there are certain ways in which we can come into practice, of course, with our conditioned mind, with our habitual ways of perceiving the world. And say, just in the first foundation of mindfulness, the Buddha is asking us to say, direct our attention to the elements or to the breath. And when we really rest our attention there, like when we give our attention to anything, it opens up for us. And so, like for me, as we do that, there can be, say, the perception of our how we belong in this web of life, how we're constantly giving and receiving in this web of life. And as we get more conscious of that, it's inviting us into a different way of being. So how we direct our attention to the elements, we can learn about interbeing. How we direct our attention to our mind, we can learn about the capacity of our mind and heart to have like really boundless qualities, you know. So all of this is in the realm still of like, okay, so we're here and we can direct our attention, we can deepen and learn about this entering into our experience in a different way. And that for me is really, really important. And within that, the encouragement of the Buddha's teaching also to from that place of interdependence, from that place of awareness, to recognize where we're causing harm. So, and to respond differently. So all of this for me is like really anchored in the early teachings and is using our capacity, our known capacity to direct our attention, and then deepening into those doorways. And then for me, what happens there, and this is the bit that Ayasantachita was saying that I would touch on, is that as we start to come into embodied knowing, our embodied knowing of interdependence, let's say, or as we start to notice awareness itself, like the capacity of mind that is listening and receiving all of the time, it's like these are ways of knowing that are actually less grasping. They're less needing to know all the time. And yet, like our embodied knowing can be very anchored, our awareness can be very steady and open. So the Buddha talked about having a mind that is malleable, wieldy and steady. And it's like we're inviting us into these aspects of our experience which are already here, but we're starting to deepen into them. And in that place, we have more freedom to both sense our support, our resource in our interdependence, and also our capacity to receive that which is arising without grasping. And this is really, really important, because if we're going to learn to go beyond our habitual reference points and habitual ways of functioning, of course there's a space. Of course there has to be, there's a gap there, which is usually pretty uncomfortable for us as human beings, because we're so used to controlling, we're so used to directing, we're so used to thinking of what we want and getting it. And this paradigm is actually very different from that. It's like instead of going after a goal, it's like coming back to our sources. So the source of our embodied life, our interdependence, our constant interchange with this life that we're part of. We're constantly being nourished, we're constantly giving back. And the source that is here underneath all of our thoughts, so awareness itself, rather than just like controlling our thoughts, we're looking deeper than them into the awareness that is holding them. And we can rest there, and it can allow us to hold that which is painful until we understand what the appropriate response is. So it's coming from a very, very different place in our being. And there are teachings about this even in the old teachings. So Ajahn Sumedha, as I'm sure many of you know, he taught both of us to like really be aware of awareness. So notice the space around thoughts, notice the space of the knowing, and that knowing can actually hold and receive and listen. And he called it like a fullness of mind. It's a sensitivity, it's a fullness that isn't driven by greed, it's not driven by hatred, it's not driven by aversion. It can receive, and there's wisdom in there that can discern that which is harmful, and so respond more appropriately in this world. So that's a very different model where we may be coming from in our mind, and in terms of our embodied experience, when we really, for me, when I really practice with the elements practice, it's also inviting us into a much softer, less pushy, more connected, more relational way of being. And so these are spaces of less clear conceptual knowing and yet more deep alignment. And I think this is very, very important for listening like into the intelligence of life in our times and learning to respond beyond our habits. So in the old teachings, they talk about this lovely phrase, yoniso manasikara, which can be like, one translation is like as wise reflection or wise attention. And another translation is turning the attention back to the womb of awareness. So as we are feeling what is happening on a planetary level with so much delusion, so much oppression, so much harm, and everything that comes with that, all the fear, it's like we need a much, much deeper resource to not just use our spiritual practice to turn away. And for me, this comes with a mix of both the embodied knowing, the recognition of our interdependence, and the deep intention that arises there to release harm for all beings. This spaciousness of awareness, bring that pain back to the womb of awareness, to the source that isn't afraid to feel, that isn't afraid to know pain, and to hold it and to respond appropriately, to respond in a way that is for the welfare of all. So those models are there in the old teachings, and there are practices we can do to turn our mind to this, to habituate ourselves to this different way of knowing that is less grasping but very responsive, very aligned with the intelligence of life, with the whole of the sacred web of life. So we can turn to practices like noticing the awareness around our thoughts, noticing the space, noticing the arising and ceasing of experience in this spaciousness, sensing into the vitality of the energy that is here when we're not grasping. Because, we think when we haven't grasped something, it's going to just disappear. And actually, as many of you know, we come into a more alive experience of presence that is less grasped. And so at some level frightening, but in another way very freeing, very responsive, very much more fit for purpose in this world where we need to be responding, but not from our habits. And then in the Mahayana teachings, there is the model of Kuan Yin. So Kuan Yin is this the Bodhisattva of compassion. They, she, her, she, he, and they are said to be this being who can hear the sounds of the world. And how they do this is that they're said to have established a samadhi, a concentration that is unshakable, but not unshakable in the sense that it turns away, unshakable in the sense of this infinite capacity to receive, not grasping, way beyond our habitual ways of knowing, but here within our hearts. And so this, as we notice awareness, as we notice our capacity to receive pain, we can expand it, we can turn it to the very painful places in our world. And rather than overwhelmed, there's a capacity to hold, to listen, to discern, to respond. And so, this is like, we can say, well, it's an image or it's a model of practice, but it's actually something we can be practicing as we're here in our times where there's such destruction in the ways that we're relating to the planet, to each other. There's genocide. It's just horrendous. And we need to be digging deeper and into different ways of being to hold this. And so I'll end shortly, but just to say that for me, as we, in a very real way, start to notice this capacity of heart that can receive. So starting small, we start with something within our own experience, expand it, notice how much actually we can hold, not fearing the pain, but rather trusting we can hold it. And respond. There's that. And there's this deepening into a knowing of interdependence that, as Aya Sanchita was saying, it's a shift in our way of being. So rather than being little me, I'm going about my business, it's like I'm aware that I'm constantly breathing, or I'm dependent on the water, I'm dependent on the earth, I'm dependent on other beings, actually. That's a shift in the sense of being, that then the ethics that spring from there are very different, because the field of connection is different. It's inviting us into something different. And as we notice, we also have this awareness, this vast capacity of awareness. That's a shift in the sense of being as well, because it's not just like, oh, me and my little mind. It's like there's actually a much deeper support there that can help to bring discernment within one's being, and it brings a great deal of strength, So in some of the early teachings, they talk about this shift in lineage within our being, like there's just when we talk about the 3 refuges and 5 precepts, there's this sense of like, where is our alignment coming from? So like from awakeness and the aspiration to non-harming, essentially, from a deep sense of community where we recognize we're part of a web of life, and we shift our alignment to be honoring that, and it's shift of lineage in our being, and it's very, very powerful, and I feel it's really needed in this world. And there's beauty in it, which is also important in this world. There's the beauty of coming to some deeper place in our being. There's the beauty of what we can offer from there, in a much more connected way. And mystery, like we see differently. So, for me, I often like the image of the night sky. It's like when you look in the daylight, you think, I wouldn't believe there are stars. And then you look at night and it's like, oh, look, there's all these, there's stars, we perceive differently. And so as we allow ourselves into these softer places of knowing that are actually very strong within our being, we perceive differently. There's nourishment and there's capacity there. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. But,
thank you so much, Sumedha. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, after this beautiful reflection, we could just, find a posture we can sustain for about 35 minutes for meditation. And, from what Sumedha has been sharing with us, that as I've said very often, solutions from a disconnected place will not, gain any traction. But first, we need to really, work on our capacity to come back into relationship with the sourcing, where all of this is kind of arising from. On one level, the web of life, which is the ground from which our bodies have emerged, the elements, which are the same in the body of the planet and in our individual human earth bodies. And then, the womb of awareness, that which knows about what is happening, in the web of life. And through that awareness, the knowing, starting to see where harm is perpetuated and how all of it, is out of alignment with the depths of what we would like to see happening. So how can we, practice in a way which helps us to, have a different alignment? But we need to start where we are. We need to start to see, the conditioning we have received, and trusting the process, that we have what we need to meet what is happening, and through that capacity to really meet what is happening, to mature and grow into a bigger way of allowing, life to speak for itself and speak through us, becoming part of what I sometimes call, the immune system. Before the session, Sumedha and I were speaking about, in a way, we are teaching the same teaching we have received, from Ajahn Sumedha in the Thai forest tradition, the resting in awareness. But it's much less a transcendent teaching in trying, to leave behind the messiness of embodiment and the messiness of the web of life, but it's more like a coming back to what is at the ground, of this embodiment, knowing that this is teaching us about maturing and becoming more and more accountable participants in that web of life. And the complexity of all of it, and the need, of a way to connect, and the body is the place to connect, because these bodies have emerged out of the web of life. And it's not like about, working super hard, but it's a series of micro adjustments. And for taking the time to slow down and turn towards the complexity without, expectation of immediate results, because it's a cultivation. And we need each other's presence and encouragement to stay in the process. So noticing the body sitting and breathing. And being, in the direct experience of it, sensing the body from inside. And, noticing we have arms and legs. The human form. With many different systems, subsystems, which are keeping this form going. Breathing, the respiratory system. taking in oxygen, breathing out CO2. The digestive system, which deals with the food and the drink which comes in and then distributes it throughout the body, and going to the toilet and releasing what can no longer be used. It is very sophisticated interdependence. The skeletal system which keeps the body upright. So you're sitting here. A hormone system, endocrine system, the bloodstream throughout the body. Just honoring the intelligence of all of these systems, working in unison with the system of the planet, working with in response with the sun and the stars, and the vastness of this process, the impossibility, to bring that into words, but allowing the mystery to touch us and inviting us into listening, into collaboration, into a sense of awe and reverence to something so much vaster than what our small thinking minds can really wrap themselves around. And in that way, relating differently. And the thinking mind is still an important element, but more as a servant, not as a leader in this shift of perception, which needs to ground itself into our species in order to inform us about how to respond. It's an intuitive knowing, which has nothing to do with the intellect, but much more to the heart, the body, different way of knowing, which slowly comes online as we are willing to train ourselves in it. By opening up these neural pathways which haven't been used for a long time, but they are there, they are dormant. They are part of our inheritance as a species, which has emerged out of Earth about 2.5 million years ago, when the first species Homo, genus Homo, started to show up. The depth of relationship it is somehow, still encoded in our DNA, but it has become, it has been forgotten, but it's not lost, and we can recognize the necessity and cultivate the intention to remember and integrate all of the technologies and all of the powers which we have been developing with the intellect, to ground them in the reality of embodiment as our next evolutionary assignment in order to mature more into our potential. And seeing the incredible precision of the process. And there are times of going forward, transcending, and there are times of coming back down into the immanence of embodiment. And we are at that crossroads really now. And the way Sumedha and I have been receiving this teaching, it was very transcendent. And now, as we are noticing what's going on in the biosphere and the web of life, we start to move down. And all of the confusion that brings about, and the hesitancy, what's going on, what's happening, and then again trusting that the core teaching is timeless. It's a sense of relating through awareness and sensing, and not getting lost in the thinking mind. And the natural compassion which comes from that, and the wisdom, because it's challenging, and we need each other to stay with the process. Because this kind of deep conditioning, that if something is difficult, if something is bringing discomfort, there's something wrong with it. And then doubting ourselves. But the instruction is to slow down. To slow down and allow and calling on the lineage, remembering that this is a practice which has been done since a long time, coming to us from the Buddha over 2,600 years ago. So sensing into the body, the weight of the body on the cushion on the chair, and letting go of contraction, letting go of struggle, letting it all drop down into the ground underneath where we are sitting. And breathing up the stability, the vastness of the earth which we are part of. And with the out breath, relaxing into the vastness in front of us. And then to one side. Behind us. And to the other side. Above and below, just letting go into that limitless vastness of earth, which is a sphere, and it's limitless. In that sense, it is a vast being which is in communication with other stars and planets, and all of those are held in awareness. Noticing the grasping energy in the mind which wants to kind of contract, and if you're noticing it, just allowing, letting go. And coming back to that sense of listening, opening, being the knowing. A refuge in Buddha, refuge in knowing. Knowing impermanence. And emptiness. And the web of life. As an evolving process, and as a expression of Dhamma. Which invites us to mature and grow by releasing all kinds of grasping and fear. By being willing to be at the edge of the discomfort, of the stretch. As it is now kind of basically delivered into our lives through the global situation. Of huge complexity, and remembering, to come back to stand firm with Earth, because we're already here. There's already so much going on in terms of our connection with Earth. This is where we can start. And trusting the responses which emerge out of that relationship. That it doesn't have to be all, our intellect. Our intellect cannot wrap itself around this mystery. But it can help us, to set up skillful structures to support the relationship, to give us the support to be able to stay open and in reverence to what wants to come through. And there are, times in history where this communication becomes louder, such as this time, because our species is basically in danger. And it's an invitation, to open to the instructions. And to slow down. So rebuilding this capacity to sense and feel our visceral participation in the planet. which is a way of allowing life to speak through us. Being aware that how we are, standing on the shoulders of our ancestors who come before us, our, ancestors in terms of this physical body, but also the ancestors who have passed on the teaching. And, what can we contribute at this point in time in order to keep this going, keep the space open for future generations to land. Future generations depending on us to do our bit. By simply being willing to sitting in that question. And receiving the answers through the body. From the ground up. This visceral knowing of non-separation. And then, being aware of that which knows non-separation. Resting as awareness. The spaciousness which allows the process to reveal itself. And also how we can participate and benefit and serve according to our capacities and talents. So in 2 minutes or so, I'm going to ring the bell, 2-3 minutes.